Newly released footage offers a dramatic look this morning at Antares rocket disaster. Remote cameras captured the unmanned flight exploding about 15 seconds after it took off from Virginia last month.
Some stories don't announce their importance when they happen. They begin as breaking news. Something flashes across a screen, a line on a ticker, or a headline about an explosion or a ship lost at sea. Days later, the world moves on. But the quiet truth is that behind those brief headlines often lie years of ignored warnings, engineering gambles, and human assumptions that turn fatal. Tonight's story pulls at two of those forgotten threads, two tragedies separated by decades and disciplines, yet bound by a single name, Antares. One happened beneath the waves, the other high above the earth. One cost lives, the other cost millions. Both revealed cracks in the systems we trust most, our technology, our institutions, and our confidence in control. This isn't about coincidence. It's about how human ambition, when paired with complacency, can repeat the same mistakes in entirely different worlds. By the early 2000s, NASA had begun transferring much of its cargo transportation to the International Space Station into private hands, marking a new era of commercial resupply. The goal was simple but ambitious: harness the ingenuity and efficiency of private industry while reducing governmental cost and oversight burdens. Through the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services and the Commercial Resupply Services programs, companies like Orbital Sciences Corporation stepped forward to carry the torch of American innovation into orbit. Using its Antares rocket and Cygnus cargo spacecraft, Orbital aimed to prove that private spaceflight could be reliable, safe, and economically sustainable. But behind the optimism was the ever-present shadow of risk. Each launch carried the hopes of engineers, astronauts, and the public, and the potential for failure that could shatter confidence in the entire public-private model. Antares was not a newcomer in spirit, even if the rocket itself was a modern build. Its beating heart, the AJ-26 engines, had roots in the Cold War. Originally Soviet-made NK-33s, built for the ill-fated N-1 Moon program of the late 1960s. They had been stored for decades before being refurbished and integrated into an American rocket. These engines, despite their age, promised powerful thrust and remarkable efficiency. Yet time is a cruel adversary in aerospace engineering. The engine's materials, seals, and internal design were never intended for prolonged storage, nor for the specific operating conditions imposed by Antares. Engineers reconditioned and modified them, but even with advanced testing, certain vulnerabilities were hard to detect, especially those involving complex oxygen plumbing systems and tolerances that differed from modern designs. The AJ-26s carried a hidden fragility, one that would remain dormant until the night of October 28, 2014. The evening air was still over Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia as spectators gathered to witness the launch of the Cygnus CRS-Orb-3 mission. Cameras streamed live, capturing every detail of the brightly lit pad as Antares stood poised against the darkness. The countdown reached its final seconds, and the engines ignited, bathing the pad in a blinding orange glow. The rocket began its ascent, but within moments, something went terribly wrong. Flames erupted at the base. A growing inferno swallowed the first stage. The vehicle, engulfed in fire, began to lose stability. In less than 15 seconds, Antares disintegrated in a massive explosion, raining debris across the launch area and nearby coastline. The shockwave rippled through the air, felt by onlookers miles away. What was supposed to be a routine resupply mission turned instantly into a spectacle of destruction. The cargo, the rocket, and years of work vanished in an instant. In the aftermath, investigators descended upon the site, sifting through wreckage and telemetry data to piece together what had happened. It didn't take long to locate the core of the disaster. One of the AJ-26 engines had suffered a catastrophic oxygen fire. The failure began deep within the engine, where oxygen, under extreme pressure, leaked into a region not designed to contain combustion. When the superheated environment ignited the trapped oxygen, the engine's thin metal walls and joints were no match for the expanding flames. Within moments, the internal fire breached critical systems, triggering the loss of structural integrity. The failure cascaded through the vehicle, tearing apart its systems in a violent chain reaction. The design weakness that had once been theoretical was now vividly, painfully real. What made the tragedy even more haunting was that warning signs had surfaced before. During previous ground tests, engineers had noticed irregularities and burn patterns within the engines. These anomalies were investigated, but the full implications weren't grasped until after the explosion. The investigation's conclusion was clear and sobering. The AJ-26's legacy hardware carried intrinsic vulnerabilities, and adapting it for modern flight conditions introduced risks that had been underestimated. The lessons came at a high price. In the days that followed, the cleanup effort began. The launch pad was badly damaged, scorched by flames and strewn with debris. Contamination from propellant chemicals required meticulous environmental remediation. NASA faced not only logistical setbacks, but also a blow to public confidence. Critics questioned whether relying on refurbished Soviet engines had been a calculated gamble or an oversight born of budget pressure. The delay rippled through the ISS schedule as vital supplies, experiments, and equipment had been lost in the fireball. For Orbital, it was a reckoning, one that demanded a fundamental reassessment of its design and testing philosophy. The aftermath reshaped policies across the commercial space sector. Testing procedures were overhauled to include deeper material inspections and stress evaluations on legacy components. NASA implemented stricter oversight on contractor risk assessments and demanded more transparent reporting of anomalies. The emphasis shifted from efficiency and reuse toward safety and redundancy. Orbital itself made the difficult but necessary decision to retire the AJ-26 engines, replacing them with newer RD-181 engines built by NPO Energomash, modern, tested, and designed for current launch environments. Even with these corrections, the scars of the 2014 explosion lingered. The disaster was a chilling reminder that in aerospace, progress often walks a razor's edge between triumph and tragedy. Each component, each joint, each assumption must bear the weight of precision, because even a hidden flaw can ignite a chain of events no one can stop. The Antares failure became a touchstone for change, influencing how NASA and its partners approached risk, heritage hardware, and system integration. Though no crew was endangered that night, the implications were profound. The event demonstrated how a single technical oversight, buried deep within an engine's design, could unravel years of preparation in seconds. It exposed the fragility of trust between government agencies and private industry, a trust that must be earned through transparency, rigor, and humility. In the years that followed, Antares would rise again with redesigned engines and renewed caution, but the memory of the explosion would remain etched in the minds of engineers and viewers alike. The night sky over Wallops had burned bright, then darkened in silence, leaving behind not just wreckage, but a lasting lesson about the unforgiving nature of flight and the price of discovery. The sea that night was calm, indifferent to what was about to unfold. The FV Antares, a small Scottish fishing trawler, moved steadily across familiar waters, its nets trailing far behind. For its crew, the work was routine. Long hours, rough conditions, but nothing unusual. Around them, the ocean was alive with invisible movement. Naval vessels, fishing boats, and even submarines often shared the same stretches of sea, each guided by its own purpose. Most days, invisible boundaries and radio channels kept them safe from one another. But on this night, in 1992, those invisible safeguards would fail, and the quiet sea would turn deadly. Far below the surface, HMS Trenchant, a Royal Navy nuclear-powered submarine, was conducting exercises. Submarines like Trenchant operate under a veil of secrecy, relying on sonar to detect what the human eye cannot see. Every sound matters. A distant propeller, a shifting current, the hum of another vessel. Watchkeeping aboard such a vessel is intense, precise, and unforgiving. It requires constant vigilance and perfect communication between sonar operators and command. But that night, something in that chain broke. Whether from fatigue, overconfidence, or a simple misinterpretation of sonar data, the crew's awareness of nearby surface vessels slipped. A fishing trawler working legally in its own grounds was not seen as the threat it truly was. At some point, HMS Trenchant changed course, attempting to steer clear of what it believed was another contact. The maneuver was made without realizing that directly ahead, the FV Antares was towing heavy nets deep below the surface. Those nets became the fatal link between two worlds, the unseen submarine and the unarmed trawler above. As the submarine's steel hull sliced through the dark water, it caught the nets, pulling the Antares violently from its equilibrium. The fishing boat had no warning. Within seconds, its stern was yanked downward. Water surged across the deck, and the vessel began to capsize. Panic spread among the 4 men aboard, but there was no time. The Antares sank swiftly, vanishing beneath the waves before distress calls could even reach the airwaves. When rescuers arrived, all that remained was a scattering of debris and a haunting silence where the trawler had been. 4 fishermen were gone, swallowed by the sea they had known their entire lives. The Royal Navy immediately launched a search and recovery operation, followed by a full inquiry. The results were devastatingly clear. The FV Antares had done nothing wrong. It had been fishing legally, within permitted zones, following established maritime rules. The blame lay with HMS Trenchant and its crew, whose watchkeeping and situational awareness had failed. The submarine had operated without fully accounting for surface traffic in an area known for fishing activity. The sonar systems that should have detected the trawler either misread the data or failed to interpret it correctly. Communication lapses compounded the error. The maneuver that was meant to avoid danger had instead triggered a fatal chain reaction. During the inquiry, the contrast between the 2 vessels, one a humble trawler, the other a nuclear submarine, was impossible to ignore. The Royal Navy accepted responsibility, acknowledging procedural failures and deficiencies in their safety oversight. Yet, acknowledgement could not bring justice to the families who had lost their loved ones. Legal proceedings followed, but compensation could never match the cost of 4 human lives. The families of the Antares crew faced not only grief, but a painful public spotlight, as the tragedy ignited national outrage and debate. Across the United Kingdom, the fishing community mourned and protested. For those who made their living at sea, the sinking of the Antares was not just a tragedy, it was a warning. Questions flooded the press and Parliament alike. How could a highly advanced naval vessel, equipped with state-of-the-art detection systems, fail to see a small fishing boat? Why were submarines allowed to operate so close to civilian areas without clear communication or notice? Fishermen demanded greater protection, insisting that military exercises respect their right to work safely in shared waters. Editorials condemned what they saw as arrogance in naval culture, a belief that stealth and secrecy outweighed civilian safety. For the public, the story became a chilling reminder that the sea's greatest dangers sometimes come not from storms, but from human error hidden beneath the surface. The emotional toll was immeasurable. The men aboard the Antares were more than statistics. They were members of a close-knit community, men whose lives revolved around the tides and the catch. Their loss shattered families, strained livelihoods, and left a lingering fear among those who returned to sea. Memorials were held in their honor, small gestures against an ocean that had given no mercy. The sense of injustice drove the conversation beyond grief, forcing the government and the Royal Navy to confront systemic flaws. In the months that followed, sweeping reforms were introduced. The Royal Navy tightened operational protocols for submarines near coastal fishing zones. Rules were put in place requiring more rigorous sonar watchkeeping, improved communication between sonar teams, and additional layers of verification before maneuvers in busy areas. Submarines were instructed to avoid known fishing grounds whenever possible, or, at the very least, to establish exclusion zones during exercises. New technology was incorporated to enhance sonar precision in shallow waters, and redundant monitoring systems were introduced to reduce the chance of human error. These changes were designed to ensure that no other fishing vessel would share the same fate as the Antares. Still, the sea remains unpredictable, and even the best technology cannot erase risk entirely. What the sinking of the FV Antares revealed was not just a gap in protocol, but a gap in perception. How invisible dangers can emerge when trust in systems replaces human vigilance. The tragedy became a lasting lesson etched into maritime history, a story of 2 vessels whose paths should never have crossed, and of lives lost because the unseen world below failed to recognize the fragile one above. For the families left behind, the reforms came too late, but their grief reshaped the rules of the sea, ensuring that every submerged maneuver would forever carry the memory of the Antares and the men who went down with her. At first, the Antares rocket explosion and the sinking of the FV Antares seem worlds apart. One, a technological disaster born in the skies, the other, a maritime tragedy beneath the waves. Yet both unfolded from the same quiet seed: institutional complacency. In each case, systems meant to safeguard human endeavor had grown comfortable, trusting past success as proof of future safety. The Antares rocket carried within it engines designed half a century earlier, relics of a different technological age, patched and tested, but still fragile beneath modern expectations. Engineers and managers alike had come to believe that what had worked before would continue to hold. The same complacency haunted the Royal Navy, where watchkeeping on HMS Trenchant had slipped from the gold standard of vigilance to a routine of habit and assumption. Procedures had weakened, communication faltered, and the invisible dangers of the deep were underestimated. In both stories, the warning signs were subtle, small oversights, minor compromises, tolerated just long enough to turn deadly. The cost of those oversights went far beyond the immediate destruction. When Antares exploded in 2014, it wasn't just a rocket that vanished. It was the credibility of a commercial partnership, the faith of a public that believed space had become safer, and the momentum of a fragile industry learning to trust private hands. When the FV Antares was dragged under the waves in 1992, the loss was deeply human, cutting through families and communities, leaving scars that no investigation could heal. Both disasters forced their institutions into painful introspection. Engineers, sailors, administrators, and policymakers were all left asking the same question: how could such preventable failures have slipped through the cracks? The answer, in both cases, lay in the slow erosion of oversight, a quiet complacency that grows when vigilance becomes routine, when checklists replace critical thought, and when the absence of recent failure is mistaken for proof of safety. Technology may fail in spectacular ways, but it is culture that sets the stage for those failures. In the case of the Antares rocket, there were pressures, deadlines to meet, contracts to honor, and costs to cut. The decision to rely on refurbished Soviet engines seemed bold yet practical, a triumph of resourcefulness. Beneath that pragmatism, however, was an unspoken gamble, that aging hardware could bear the demands of a new era. When the AJ-26 engine ignited and the rocket tore itself apart, the truth became undeniable. Engineering success cannot rest on inherited confidence. In the case of the FV Antares, the culture within naval operations had also shifted. Watchkeeping standards that once demanded total discipline had dulled under routine. Over time, the unthinkable became thinkable, that a nuclear submarine could pass beneath fishing waters without seeing what lay above. These are not just mechanical failures, they are failures of accountability, where questioning is softened, and where those who should speak up instead learn to stay quiet. In both spaceflight and seafaring, silence can be lethal. The parallels between these tragedies extend far beyond their shared name. Each reveals how fragile complex systems become when human institutions allow comfort to replace caution. They show that when leaders underestimate risk, when oversight weakens, or when history is trusted too blindly, disasters become inevitable. Yet, the contrasts are equally striking. The Antares rocket represented humanity's push outward, toward exploration and innovation. The FV Antares embodied the persistence of everyday labor and the timeless bond between people and the sea. One reached for the stars, the other worked the waters that fed generations. Both met the same fate, not through malice or accident alone, but through the slow decay of diligence. These dual stories echo through time as stark reminders. Retrofitting old technology to meet new challenges without fully confronting its weaknesses is dangerous. Relying on training and procedures without ensuring they are actively maintained is equally perilous. Whether in the vacuum of space or the depths of the ocean, systems depend on people, on their judgment, humility, and willingness to question what seems certain. The moment institutions lose that edge, the moment vigilance becomes routine, the countdown to disaster begins. And so the name Antares carries with it a strange resonance. It speaks not only of two separate catastrophes, but of a shared lesson written in different elements: fire and water. The Antares rocket burned bright and fell, its wreckage scattering across the Virginia coast. The FV Antares vanished into cold, dark water, leaving only grief in its wake. Both stories remind us that technology, no matter how advanced, cannot replace the need for human integrity. It is not the machinery alone that fails, it is the system of trust and responsibility that surrounds it. When we study these events today, it is not for the shock of destruction, but for what they reveal about us. Every tragedy exposes the fragile balance between progress and prudence. The Antares rocket and the FV Antares trawler, separated by decades and disciplines, show how narrow that balance can be. One overlooked margin, one unchecked assumption, one moment of inattention, that's all it takes. These are not just cautionary tales for engineers or sailors. They are reminders for anyone who works within systems that carry lives, dreams, or the weight of public trust. In remembering these two Antares, we are reminded that every field, whether it explores the stars or plumbs the depths, depends on humility before complexity. The farther we reach, the more vital it becomes to remember what keeps us safe. Relentless oversight, transparent culture, and an unwavering respect for the unknown. Fire and sea, metal and flesh, both yield to the same truth. Catastrophe begins when vigilance ends, and so the twin Antares stand as warnings, not of failure alone, but of what is lost when institutions forget that safety is never inherited. It is earned every single day. Thank you for spending time with these haunting and instructive stories. If the tragedy behind Antares moved you, puzzled you, or made you want to dig deeper into how our systems fail and why, please let me know with a comment below. Share your thoughts, theories, or even other disasters you've wondered about. And if you'd like to see more of these deep dives into space disasters, maritime mysteries, or how engineering, culture, and fate collide, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next.